Good evening. My name is John H. and I am an alcoholic. Welcome to the Code Blue Big Book Action Seminar. What we're going to do in this seminar, guys, is we're going to go through the first 164 pages of our big book, our Guide to Freedom, and we're going to do exactly what it says. I myself am no big book guru. I am no spiritual wonder man. I'm just a simple drunk who was almost dead from the disease when a couple recovered alcoholics took me through the book. I did the work, and it saved my life. Now, as a result of that, I try to pass on what has been so freely given to me. Now, I borrow heavily from the Joe and Charlie Big Book Weekend tapes. I borrow heavily from that smartass Clancy. I borrow from Chuck C. I borrow from all of the giants who have gone before me. So please, get yourself a big book, large print I prefer, a highlighter and a pen, and bring your willingness. Get ready to change your life. Thanks for listening. Good evening, I'm John, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, John.
During the 1950s, a man by the name of Max C., now dead, started a group in Winnipeg, Manitoba called the Golden Slippers. The group was a back to the basics of the big book kind of group, especially for those people who could not stay sober for any length of time. The group took a bunch of chronic slippers and walked them through the steps, taking the action exactly as laid out by the first 100 men and women who wrote the basic textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not your typical thanks for sharing kind of AA meeting, nor is it like any seminar. Participants are asked to do all 12 steps as laid out in our basic textbook. One or more of the people who have done this work before will be guides to lead you through the instructions in our basic textbook using a dictionary published at about the same time as the book Alcoholics Anonymous to help us better understand the directions as they were written by the first 100 men and women. We ask every participant to commit to the entire process. Though we read and study the AA Big Book, this group is not limited to members of AA. We who have participated in these groups before have come to understand that these sessions make us much better sponsors. We can now lead people through the steps exactly as given to us by those who have gone before, unfettered and unchanged. In addition to being a boot camp for sponsors, we also feel this is especially valuable to those who have been through some sort of treatment or rehab and have been, in effect, left off at step 3 or 5. Recovery requires that we do all 12 steps. We recover in AA by taking the steps, and if we don't take the action as described in our basic textbook, we may not recover. These study and action sessions will guide you through the steps precisely as the first 100 men and women laid them down. These are back to the basic sessions, accepting the simple kit of spiritual tools that's been laid at our feet. Let's open with the set-aside prayer. If you're new, you'll figure it out. God, please let me set aside everything I think I know about sobriety, life, and you, so that I may be open to a new experience. Peace. All right, welcome everybody. If you're new, I know I gave the new packets, but I have 2 more with all the paperwork up to this point. If this is your first session, and then we just have the 1 sheet of paper for today. So easy on the paperwork today. Just a quick review of what we did in the first 3 sessions since we took the 4th of July off. The first session, all we really did is we looked a little bit about the history of AA and the history of the Big Book, which was the forewords and the Roman numerals. The second week, we took a look at the doctor's opinion. Okay, in the doctor's opinion, we looked at what the problem was. Now, in Bill's writing throughout the entire first 164 pages, the way he writes is he's going to give us the problem, the solution, and how do we get that solution over and over again. Problem, solution, practical program of action to implement that solution. So the doctor's opinion told us about the obsession of the mind and the allergy of the body. Right? So what that is we have a body that cannot take alcohol, and we have a mind that can't leave it alone. In other words, we can't drink without getting drunk. That's our body, right? And we cannot not start drinking once we've stopped, right? So if there's no arena in which I can fight alcohol after I've started to drink, and there's no arena in which I can fight alcohol before I've started, I'm absolutely powerless over alcohol, and my life is completely out of control, unmanageable. So we covered that in the doctor's opinion, and again, you can get onto YouTube, type in Code Blue Big Book, and then click on full session 2, and you can catch up on the first 3. The third week, what we did is we looked at Bill's story. So what they did is they followed up the doctor's opinion, or what's wrong with us, with a classic example of somebody who has the disease. So we looked at Bill, how he started to drink because of shyness and loneliness, and then he moved up to fun drinking, then he moved up to necessary drinking, and then he was drinking at the end for the sickest reason of all, oblivion. And then we watched as Bill was able to effect a recovery from that situation. And the whole idea is if we can identify with Bill and we see that he was able to recover, perhaps we can do what he did and we can recover too, right? One other thing too, and I mentioned this, whenever you see the words but, although, yet, on the other hand, still, and look, that means something interesting is coming up, and they want us to really pay attention. But, although, yet, on the other hand, still, and look. And if you see the italicized words, they're shouting at us. They're shouting at us when you see that. So today we're going to read There is a Solution, right? And, a lot of people say, well, John, there's a lot of different ways that we can, that we can get better. And, I always say, well, the chapter heading says there is a solution. And I know I myself tried everything possible before I came to AA and before I actually did the work in the book. I tried everything else that I could do, and I certainly wasn't able to find a different solution. So in this chapter, Bill is going to tell us about two powers. He's going to tell us about the power of the fellowship. Okay, that's the meetings, that's going to Perkins, the sober softball, getting together to watch a football game with sober people, right? The power of the fellowship. And there is great benefit and relief from people coming together like that, right? But this relief is only temporary, right? I call it medicine cabinet recovery. And if you're a real alcoholic, I don't care how many meetings you go to, eventually you will drink again. Now, the second power that he's going to talk about is the vital spiritual experience, okay? And that's what we get when we do the work in the book. So I always like to say that the fellowship supports us while we do the work in the book, and we have a vital spiritual experience that changes us. Now, the first 100 people who recovered, they didn't have meetings around the clock like we do, right? So they all recovered by doing the work and going out and recruiting other members. We're lucky today because we can use both powers. If we can use the power of the fellowship and the power of the vital spiritual experience, we might be able to overcome alcoholism. So again, as far as when people say there's many different solutions, I say, well, I tried everything until I found there is a solution. So let's go to chapter 2. And I might be going faster than I usually do because there's a lot. We got a lot to cover today. So if you can't keep up, that's okay. You just go back onto YouTube and get anything you missed. So at the top of the page, we're on page 17. Let's circle that first word, we. Circle that word, we. We can do what I can't do, right? And then at the top of the page, let's write, this is not a me program, me being in quotation marks. This is not a me program. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Highlight these 4 words. Nearly all have recovered. Okay? There's that word recovered again. I always make fun, right? Because I've only run into 3 old duffers that told me, John, you can't recover from this disease, right? And and I look at them and I say, well, when I came in here, I was angry, I was full of fear, I was physically ill, I couldn't stop drinking, I was miserable, desperate, afraid, I was contemplating suicide, and I absolutely have recovered from that situation, right? I am no longer that way. Now, I tell them I'm never cured. There are certain things that I'm going to have to do on a daily basis to stay recovered, but I have recovered from that hopeless condition of mind and body that I was in, right? I love life now, man. Before, I'd wake up and I go, crap, I'm still alive, right? They have solved, underline solved, the drink problem. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. Underline, we are people who normally would not mix. Okay, I mean, back when this book was written, I don't know, I think there were maybe 99 middle-aged white men and a woman, right? How prophetic is that? I mean, we've got people of all different races, people of all different religions, of all different educational backgrounds, of monetary backgrounds. I mean, a very prophetic statement there. But there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. Okay, highlight to captain's table. We are like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. So what Bill is doing here is he's talking about the fellowship by describing something he thinks we already know about. Now, in the first half of the 20th century, the great ocean liner was the main mode of transportation between the continents. And if you were a poor person and you're over in Ireland and you want to come to America, you're going to book passage in what is called the steerage section. The steerage section, it didn't cost very much money. It was at the very bottom of the ship. There is no fresh air. There's cramped quarters, lousy food. You're lucky if you get to share a hammock with somebody, right? Very bad accommodations, but it didn't cost much. If you've got more money, you go to fourth class. More money, still third class. Even more money, you move up to second class. And if you've got a lot of money, you're going to go to first class. You get the best of everything. You get waiters, you get big staterooms, you get all the fresh air you want, you get the best food, right? But if you are very well connected, you've got old money, you got the right religion, you might even have a little bit of royalty in you, you are asked to dine at the captain's table. Okay, now going across the ocean, they did not want to see people from the captain's table. They didn't want them to be able to see people in the steerage section, so they even had different stairwells so that the well-to-do would not run into these poor folk, right? So he's telling about how different they are. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. That feeling of, highlight, having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. Just highlight to there. Next to that, we're going to write, recovery binds us together. Recovery binds us together. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. So what Bill's talking about here now, he's talking about the night that the Titanic hit that iceberg. And, what happened is you get the guy from the captain's table wearing his tuxedo and his nice clothes, and you get the guy from the steerage section, and he's wearing his work clothes. He's got the old boots with the holes on them, and they're at the top of the ship, and that ship's going down. They're looking at each other like, what the hell, They got nothing in common. But as soon as they land in the water, they've got everything in common, right? Because they're going to say, how the hell do we save ourselves, right? They have everything in common at that point, right? So they're helping each other out, and when they get pulled onto that lifeboat, they are happy, they're singing, they're dancing, they're laughing, they're patting each other on the back, they're saying, we made it, this is the greatest thing ever, right? But when these two guys get to shore, they look at each other and they say, and then they each go their separate ways and they never see each other again. But we here in Alcoholics Anonymous, right, we escape from a common peril. Again, it's the greatest feeling in the world, right, and that's the fellowship. But we always have alcohol waiting right outside the door, right, and if we go out the door alone, it's probably going to get us, right? So we don't care where you come from. We don't care who you are. We don't care how much money you got. We don't care what your education is. We don't care what your ethnic background is. We don't care what your religion. The only thing we care about is, are you an alcoholic, right? And if you're an alcoholic, we're going to join together, right, in this fellowship. So he's talking about the fellowship right there. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. Circle a common solution. And somewhere maybe off to the left, draw a little arrow, write working the steps. Working the steps. We, circle we, and then underline, have a way out on which we can absolutely agree. Okay, underline just to there. And by the way, whenever we see we in the first 164 pages, they're talking about the first 100 people who recovered. They're not talking about contemporary people in today's age. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree, and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. Circle action. Okay, so this, and then underline to the end of the page. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism, right? So it is not the news of the fellowship that the book carries. Now, I'm not saying that the fellowship isn't vitally important. It saved my life. But what he's talking about here is he's talking about the vital spiritual experience that we get when we do the work in the book. Hey, come on in, man. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness, right? We always thought, I mean, even today, John, what's the matter with you? You got low morals. John, you're sinful. John, why can't you pull yourself together? Right? I was very happy when I read the doctor's opinion and discovered that I had an illness. We have come to believe in an illness involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. Highlight to the end of the paragraph there. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. So after where it says increase the list, after that write family disease. And then next to what we just highlighted, write rock bottom. And then above rock bottom, we're going to write, we got another ask sponsee. Ask sponsee, can you relate to this? Again, the whole idea, Code Blue, is we come in here, we do the work, we get better, and then we go out and we share what we have with somebody else who's sick and dying, who's got a bad life. We show them what we did. So ask sponsee, can you relate to this? I came in here and I thought, well, God, my drinking, I was the one that it affected the most. I mean, how ignorant was I? I mean, my parents, all the people I worked with when I couldn't make it to work because I was hungover, when I showed up drunk, everybody in my family, all the missed engagements, saying I would do one thing and then not doing it. I mean, it affects everybody, right? Not just us. We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or who may be affected. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and doctor. Okay, so obviously the squiggly writing, we're going to highlight that whole paragraph. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts, and circle facts, about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. They're shouting at us right there. We got the but and the squiggly writing. So we got that little word facts. Off to the left, we're going to write fourth step column. Now we might not know what that means yet, but we're gonna discover what that means when we get to that point in the work, right? So draw a little arrow down to the bottom of the page, and let's write, we alkies are the only ones who can get through to the still suffering alcoholic. However you want to shorthand that. We alkies are the only ones who can get through to the still suffering alcoholic. And many of us have practicing alcoholics in our family, and that'll be a topic for another day when we get to the 12th step. I don't have the success with my brothers that I would like, that I can get sometimes with other people. That the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that his whole deportment means behavior and bearing, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with the real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. So at the top of the page, let's write actions first and our minds follow. Okay? Actions first and our minds follow. Now, what that means is we do the work in the book first. We take these actions and we bring our body to the meetings. We bring our body to the meeting with our sponsors, and we do the work in this book. So we take the actions first, and our minds are going to catch up with that, right? Every other therapy in the world says change the way you think first, and then you're going to change, the way that you behave and how you get along. But that's not true with us. With us, we have to change our actions first, and once we can do that, our minds will follow. We are backwards people, and I don't know what that's about, but I found it to be the case. None of us makes a sole vocation, vocation, job, or career of this work. Nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. So let's highlight this little sentence here. We feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. Put a little one next to that. That's the first thing we've got to do. Right? Nothing's going to happen unless we can stop drinking first. We got to just, at least have a somewhat clear head. And then put a 2 in front of A and highlight the next 4 lines. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. All of us spend much of our spare time in this sort of effort. You can stop highlighting there. And when it said all of us, again, that's the first 100 people. The first 100 people who wrote this. When Bill wrote this book, it started out there were 40 people sober. By the time he finished it, there were 100 people sober. And every time he wrote some chapters, he had to send these chapters to the people in the fellowship. They read them, they looked at them, they talked about changes, and they could not put them down in print until they all agreed upon what they were going to say. So again, this book is written by 100 people. It's not just written by one person. All of us spend much of our spare time in that sort of effort, which we are going to describe. Now, where we put that 2, right, much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. Next to that, very important, let's write, practicing the principles at home and at work is the harder part. Practicing the principles at home and at work is the harder part. My first year, I thought, hey, I'm going to be a good guy. I went to a meeting every day, right? I'm going to be a good guy for 1 hour a day. But I was still a raving lunatic in the rest of my life, right? So practicing these principles at home and at work is the harder part, which we're going to describe. A few are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all their time to the work. So Bill Wilson did this for the first year and a half. He was out running around recruiting people. If we keep on the way we are going, there is little doubt that much good will result, but the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by, hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which has been so freely given us? We have concluded to publish an anonymous volume, underline anonymous volume, and obviously that's this book that we're reading, setting forth the problem as we see it. We shall bring to task our combined experience. And again, underline that we, and again, that's the first 100. who wrote the book. And again, it's all of them writing this. We shall bring to the task our combined experience and knowledge. This should suggest a useful program for anyone concerned with a drinking problem. Okay, so let's highlight the next two lines. Of necessity, there will have to be discussion of matters medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. So next to the top line we highlighted, right, we are not doctors. We are not doctors, although there may be some doctors in the room, I don't know, but usually we're not doctors. We like to think we are. Medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. Next to that, write 4 balances of well-being. The 4 balances of well-being. We are aware that these matters are, from their very nature, controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. We shall do our utmost to achieve that ideal. Okay, just highlight the next 3 lines. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions, our attitudes. Hang on a minute. Underline shortcomings, draw a little arrow down and write defects of character. Defects of character, same as a shortcoming. And then we're going to write a little piece that my sponsor had me write at the bottom of the page. We're talking about, I think this is like somebody who's in maybe a first step meeting. If they don't ask your advice, don't give it. Right? And my sponsor even said, if they don't ask your advice, don't give it. He even said, when you first start sponsoring somebody, start out by showing him what you did. And eventually as your relationship matures, then you're going to be able to, give him a lot more direction. But at the beginning, if they don't ask your advice, don't give it, because we don't want to start telling people what to do, because we might turn them off and they might want to leave. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. Okay? Our very lives, we're going to highlight the next 3 lines too. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others. I'll underline constant. Our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So where the constant, draw a little arrow and write not occasional. Not occasional. Right? I thought, hey, I can do maybe 1 good deed a week. Right? Our constant thought of others and how we may help their needs. Now, you don't need to write this, but my sponsor had me write tall order for a selfish prick next to that line. It really was. You may already have asked yourself why it is that all of us became so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, underline to body, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. There's that darn word again. We have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. Right? I mean, my plan, I thought the only way out was suicide. I mean, after 20 years of coming in and out and relapse, I'm not going to put myself through this. I'm not going to put my family through it, right? If you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, highlight, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? Highlight that one right there. And then we're going to write a little note. Ask sponsee right here. Ask sponsee here, do you want to stop drinking? We've got to make sure, right? Because we're going to ask them to do some serious work. So ask sponsee here, do you want to stop drinking, right? When it's, what do I have to do? You say, hey, do you want to stop drinking? Are you ready, right? We're going to ask them. And if they give us a mumbling response or something, or they're not ready, our time is going to be better spent with somebody who's reached rock bottom and is ready to do the work. It is the purpose of this book, highlight, to answer such questions specifically. They're going to tell us exactly, right? We shall tell you what we have done. Just highlight to there. So they're gonna answer the questions specifically. Now, we shall tell you what we have done, where it says what we have done, right? Not thought. Again, not thought. We cannot think our way out of this. We can't think our way out of this, man. Self can't overcome self. We've got to do the work. If we do the work, our minds will follow. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. How many times people have said to us, I can take it or leave it alone. Why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fella can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl, I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him if he ever drank again, it'd kill him. But there he is, all lit up again. Okay, so next to those phrases, let's write, doesn't work for us. Doesn't work for us. People who don't understand alcoholism. Doesn't work for us. People who don't understand alcoholism. And these statements, we're going to look in the next paragraph or two at the three different types of drinker. These phrases that I've just read are going to refer to the first two types of drinker that we're going to talk about. Now, these are all commonplace observations on drinkers, which we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours. After from ours, write, non-alcoholics don't get it. Non-alcoholics don't get it. So we're going to highlight the next word, moderate drinker, just that word. And next to it, we're going to write type 1. Okay? Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they had good reason for it. Highlight the next little sentence. They can take it or leave it alone. Okay? Draw a line halfway under can take it or leave it alone. And so the moderate drinker, right? We talked about them when we looked at the doctor's opinion. They have a glass or two of wine. They get a slightly tipsy, out of control feeling. They don't like that feeling, and they stop. Right? They stop. You know, my sister, it drove me crazy. She'd have a glass of wine. She'd fill another one, take a couple of sips, and she wouldn't drink anymore. She'd leave it half full. That's the moderate drinker. So underneath moderate drinker, we're going to write underneath take it or leave it alone, under the line write type 2. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker, and highlight hard drinker. That's type 2. And at the bottom of the page, you can write or heavy drinker. They're called a hard drinker or a heavy drinker. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. This guy's got it easy. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. He's only going to die a couple years early. Highlight the next 5 words. If a sufficiently strong reason, just those words, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor, and then highlight the next 10 words, becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate. Okay, so if it's a sufficiently strong reason, something comes up, this man, obviously, or woman, can also stop or moderate. Although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. So the hard drinker does not have the obsession of the mind, right? So if he goes on a really bad spree and ends up in jail or detox, right? He gets out of that, he's not going to have the obsession of the mind where he's going to do the same thing a day or two later. He doesn't have the allergy of the body, right? He likes drinking, but when we put alcohol in our body demands more. The hard drinker is not like this. They drink like us, right? But if a good reason comes up, they can stop. Now, we see these guys all over the place, right? They say, look, man, I was in the service. When I was in the service, I was an alcoholic too. But dad burn it, I got out, I got married, I had kids, I started going to church, and I stopped. Why can't you stop, right? No, the hard drinker is not an alcoholic like us, right? Not an alcoholic. So draw a little line under medical attention, and under that write type 3. And then highlight, but what about the real alcoholic? Just that little bit there. He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. Highlight to the end of the paragraph. But at some stage of his drinking career, there's that but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts. So some of us, we looked in the doctor's opinion. I was a guy, the first time I ever had a Kegelbrau, I stole it, I went back and I drank till I threw up and passed out. But some of us aren't like that. But by the time we get here, we've drunken ourselves into alcoholism. So what's the difference, right? We're all the same when we walk through these doors. Here is the fellow who has been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. Highlight, he is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, just that little bit. And then we're going to write, you can write Robert Louis Stevenson or RLS. If you ever do crosswords, you're going to run into that. Robert Louis Stevenson, you can write 1819, I believe is when he wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, he was an alcoholic, right? And he died. He was what a brilliant author. If you read his stuff, he died of alcoholism, man. He died a horrible death. And you read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. If you ever read it, it's a little bit different from the Hollywood ones. He kind of like when he's talking about when he's Dr. Jekyll, he's kind of like me when I'm trying to stay sober without the steps, right? Kind of a dry drunk. So if you read the original one, you can really see that he's probably a little bit autobiographical. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. And look, when we're reading these, see if you can relate to any of the characteristics of a real alcoholic, right? As a matter of fact, we're going to write next to this whole rest of the page or the paragraph, right? Ask sponsee, can you relate to any of these descriptions? And I want you guys to ask yourself, can you relate to any of these descriptions? I'm sure that you'll see yourself in at least one or two of them. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day and he frequently becomes disgustingly, even dangerously antisocial. Highlight to the word kept. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. Right? I mean, I'll never forget. I show up for the Saturday morning sales meeting and I'm drunk, and my boss says, if you show up to one more sales meeting drunk, you're fired. Right? I didn't drink Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I got to Friday, I was feeling antsy. I said, I'm just going to have a couple of beers to settle my nerves. I started drinking and I showed up to the very next Saturday drunk and I got fired. Right? He is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor, but in that respect, he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. Underline dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. Right? Only an alcoholic is going to talk about himself like that, right? That's me. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early next morning he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative with which to taper off. Highlight, then he begins to appear at hospitals and treatment centers. Hospitals and sanitariums. Right? Same difference, right? Anybody that's been to treatment centers, that's us, man. They call it something different today. This is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic. And again, we're going to, can you identify next to the first part of this page too? We want to make sure that when we're working with somebody, we talk about how they identify and what things that we just read they identify about. And I want you folks to think about that too. This is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, as our behavior patterns vary, but this description should identify him roughly. We'll highlight to Water Wagon. Why does he behave like this if hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation? Why is it he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the Water Wagon? Okay, so next to that we just highlighted off to the left, we're going to write obsession of the mind. That's the obsession of the mind. What has become of the common sense and willpower that he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters? Perhaps there will never be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We are not sure why. Once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him, right? Some of us are that way from the beginning. Some of us reach the point. We cannot answer the riddle. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive, highlight to the end of the page, once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mentally sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. So next to that, we're going to write allergic reaction. So that's the twofold disease. He keeps giving us the problem and the solution. That's our twofold disease. We have an obsession of the mind. We can't stay stopped. And we have an allergy of the body. Once we start drinking, we got to take it all the way. So at the bottom of the page, let's write rum cake, right? Let's write NyQuil, right? NyQuil comes with its own shot glass, right? I mean, I'll never forget once I was not drinking and I was feeling a little bit poorly, so I drank a bottle of NyQuil. I went back, got 2 more, and then hell, I just went to the liquor store. So rum cake, NyQuil, and then let's also put pills from dentist. Pills from dentist. I got caught up on opiates, man. You know, I wasn't drinking and I got addicted to pills and they almost killed me. So we've got to be real careful, and we should tell both the doctor and the dentist, hey, I'm an alcoholic, right? We tell them that up front. And I mean, I did. I went in 3 years ago. I went in with a really bad cold or a flu or something, and the gal into the Target pharmacy, and the gal wrote me out a prescription. And I was walking out. I said, "Oh, by the way, I'm an alcoholic." She said, "Stop right there. Give me that back." She gave me codeine, right? And I'm glad impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. At the top of the page, let's write, worry about the first drink. Worry about the first drink. Right? There's nothing we can do about the allergy of the body. We're going to have that till the day we die. Right? The obsession of the mind is that's the first drink. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Okay, highlight this next little sentence. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body, right? Again, therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. And again, next to that, let's write obsession of the mind. That's the obsession.